Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Ace on Music. I'm your host, Ace Trump. I'm joined as always by my cohort, Sean.
Hello everyone.
So, this week I thought it would be kind of fun to talk about something that often comes up in our personal discussions. And that is that wonderful sensation that one experiences when you stumble upon a band that you see perform live or you hear their music or whatever before they really make a name for themselves. And then when they kind of blossom into the massive success that they are, you feel, I don't know, a vindication or some kind of minor superiority for having been there before everybody else. So I thought it would be fun if Sean and I told some stories about some of the bands and artists that we saw before they ever really made an impact on the world at large. So the first one that I am going to talk about is the band Korn. Now, this was way back in, I think it was in the 90s. I saw them open for Ozzy Osbourne on the I think it was No More Tours tour, where Ozzy said he was going to quit, and I saw the tour in Seattle, and this, what I thought was a fairly strange band, saw opening for them, and you know, the lead singer wearing a kilt and all this crazy stuff. And I have to be honest, at first I didn't really think an awful lot of them. I thought, okay, good luck boys, you know, I hope you make it and all that. And of course, they ended up becoming one of the biggest bands of that whole new metal era. And I don't know, it was kind of fun to watch them evolve over the years as I saw them play, and as they became better and better songwriters and better musicians, and let's face it, better and better show persons. And so it was a fun evolution to be a witness from. Now I know, Sean, that you and I have talked about such things many times, and that you actually had the good fortune of growing up in Los Angeles, in the heart of where so much of the music that we love was born.
Yeah, that's true. And I think about, I'm Generation X, born in '71, so a lot of the transitions from old metal to new metal were happening during the time I was a teenager, all the way to, you know, when I was 21, 22, when all the 90s bands started to hit. So I got to see a lot of bands kind of start out with their roots and how they blossom into these great bands. You know, it's funny you talk about Korn, because I was going to talk about one of the bands I saw earlier when I was younger was Tool. Like, they used to play a lot around the area, and there was a club called California Dreams in Anaheim. And I was lucky enough to be able to hitch a ride with a few friends when I was younger and go into these clubs. Into that club. And Korn was opening up, I believe, no, Korn was opening up. Korn was playing the week after Tool was. And I discovered these two new bands. And Korn, to me, I didn't really like them that much. But at the time. And it's funny because during one of the shows, I was hanging out with my friends, and we were drinking and stuff, and you know, being the kids that we were, and I was sitting behind the soundboard with the guy mixing the sound, and I'm like, man, his bass sounds like crap. But you gotta understand, this was like a new sound coming out back then, so I didn't understand it. And I'm like, hey man, there needs more bass, and the guy just turned bright red, and the sound guy turns over, don't tell me what to do with my job, and this, that. I'm like, oh, okay. And it turned out to be that's Korn's signature sound, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't something I was used to at the time. But yeah, I was fortunate to see a lot of bands blossom growing up.
Well, that's cool. I mean, yeah. Tool, that's a big one. I mean, they now play arenas on a regular basis. I mean, they're maybe one of the biggest sort of success stories that came out of that era altogether.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I have a funny story real quick. When Tool, before Undertow came out here in America, they were going to play another show in California Dreams, that place I was talking about in Anaheim. And what happened was the show got so sold out that they actually canceled that and transferred it over to where it's called the Galaxy now, but back then it was called the Electric Cafe. Is that Ventura or something? Or
okay.
Yeah. But what happened was, I guess they were overseas in Europe, touring before the album hit out here in America, and they had no clue on how big it was. I got this story from the merch guy. He was on the road with them, and the managers at the time wanted to keep it a surprise until they got back to the U.S. And this was the second night since they came back from that tour in Europe. They went to Vegas the night before, and then they had this big party and announced how big Undertow was. And you remember how big that album was?
Oh yeah, that was a revelation.
And he goes, they couldn't believe how big it was. They were in shock. And he goes, so they might be coming on a little late tonight. That's what he said.
Well, another one for me was a Swedish band. A few years ago, somebody came to me. It may even have been you. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But they said, look, we know you're big into Blue Oyster Cult. There's this new Swedish band. They're really weird. They wear masks and costumes, but they seem to be embracing the sort of classic rock sound that was so big in the 70s, and you might really dig it. It might be right up your alley. And they were called Ghost. Mm-hmm. And I remember listening to the record and going, okay, this is cool and everything. And every year in England, every year that doesn't have COVID all over the world, there is a giant festival, a metal festival in England called Download. And on this particular year, one of the bands that I manage, Europe, was performing on one of the stages. And just before Europe was to go on, this band, Ghost, was going to be on stage. So, there aren't all that many bands that come out of Sweden. So, I mean, the guys all in Europe were very interested in seeing their fellow countrymen and what the heck was all going on. Because there had already been a little bit of buzz about this band at this point. And we went there and we ended up meeting all of the band beforehand, and they were really, really nice guys, really had their stuff together. And we watched the performance and we were just like standing there like, wow, what are we witnessing? This is just bizarre. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, I have to be honest, at the time. I was like, this is cool, but can this really be anything major? But boy, it was just before COVID. I remember that they came to LA to perform on their latest tour, and they played the Forum, which blew my mind. I mean, the Forum's a 18,000 capacity venue, and here this band was playing it. Now I think they played the Half House. You went to that show, I think.
Yeah, they played the Wiltern too, I believe.
The Wiltern?
Yeah, but the prior to the Forum.
Weird.
Show. Yeah.
So Wiltern's a little club here in LA, like maybe 1800 or something like that.
Yeah, they went from the Whiskey to the Wiltern to the Forum in like a 5-year span. 4-year span. Yeah,
amazing. So, what was another one that you experienced?
Oh man, I have a lot. Hey, buddy. Growing up, like I said, in the '90s, man, I was fortunate to see a lot of bands not knowing they were going to be famous. I got to see bands at this place called Country Club in Reseda, and we got to see Megadeth. I got to see Slayer in '83. I mean, that was pretty much the first time they were coming out. I got to see Soundgarden. Didn't know who they were when I first saw them, and until they did their next tour, which was right before Bad Motorfinger with Danzig. And Danzig actually took a lot of these new bands under his wings back then, and let them perform. And I discovered a lot of bands like Caius. That turned me on to Queens of the Stone Age. I got to see Queens of the Stone Age blossom to where they're at now. I mean, the first time I saw them was at the Troubadour. It was just an amazing time for me. I mean, I could go on, and if you talk about going way back, I even saw Guns N' Roses at the Waters San Pedro Club, and I didn't know who they were, and I did not like them.
This is an argument we have often.
I know, man. I'm sorry, guys. If anybody's listening in that camp, I love you guys, but I just didn't like Guns N' Roses. I think I went there for another band or something. I don't remember, though. I was so young. But Waters Club, Dio used to play there. A lot of bands used to play there back in the 80s. But yeah, Water Club, I discovered Armored Saint through the Waters Club. And, Voivod, I've seen Voivod when they first started coming out. And, You know, here's a funny story. Limp Bizkit opened up for Faith No More. I believe it was, I forget what album it was. Anyway, I think it was a King for a Day album at the Palace. And it was funny because this is when that new metal was coming out. You're familiar with Limp Bizkit, right, Ace?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I wasn't digging I'm not a big Limp Bizkit fan. But it was weird. These group of kids stepped in and they were opening up for Faith No More. Now, Faith No More was just starting to get big at that time, or they already peaked. They were playing the Palladium, and then they were starting to do smaller gigs on the next album after Angel Dust. But it was weird. They had a big crew. They had a tour bus. They had a lot of management there. I remember that. And when they played, there was probably about maybe 50 people in the audience. And it was like, at this time, it was early. So it was a lot of elbow room watching this band. And it was just, at this time, they were just doing covers. Like, I Gotta Have Faith and some other couple other covers they were doing. They haven't had their first album yet. But I was like, wow, where's this going? And, all that stuff blew up. All that new metal stuff blew up right after all that, and that's when I started getting into other stuff, other avenues of music.
Well, talking about new metal, I mean, I'm going to take a page, probably the biggest band today that I saw at their infancy was Slipknot. I was introduced to this band in a very strange way. They got signed to Roadrunner. This was back in the 90s. And this was when I was first being a music journalist. And I was dealing with the PR person at Roadrunner, and she phoned me up one day and she said, "Look, I need a favor. We have signed this new band. They're right up your alley, but I don't have any material other than one demo I can send you. I can send you a band photo, but I would like you to interview one of the guys in the band." And their album doesn't even come out for another month, but they just secured a spot on the second stage for Ozfest, and would you do me this favor and interview them? And so I basically just had the one-page bio, a photograph, and a demo of the song spit it out. And I listened to the song, and it was like, whoa, this is really intense. This was like energy personified in a song. And then I saw the photograph, and it was these 9 guys. First of all, what band has 9 guys, right? But they all had these crazy masks on. And every mask was different on each guy. And the bio was about them being from Des Moines, Iowa. And I went, Des Moines? Like, what band comes from Des Moines? But I ended up talking to Sean Cran, who's the clown character in the band. And his unbridled enthusiasm was just infectious. I mean, we spoke for about 45 minutes on the phone. In fact, if you go back into the archives of this show, I posted the actual interview I did that day with him about a year ago. So go back into the archives here and you can listen to what actually happened that day. But during the course of that conversation, I decided I had to see this band. I was going to be going to Ozfest anyway. And I was going to make a point of seeing them. And they were on early on the second stage because nobody knew them. Their album wasn't even going to be out for another couple of weeks. So they were literally unknown at this point. And my friend Roland and I, we went and saw this show, and we were blown away. We were blown away by the intense energy. I mean, these guys... This was August, and it was like 3 in the afternoon or whatever, so it was hot as hell, and these guys had these masks and these heavy boiler suits that they were wearing. Didn't seem to bother them. They just went and did the whole thing. And afterwards, they all came to the side of the stage and signed autographs for the few people that would wander over to them, and I kind of caught the attention of the clown and explained who I was, and he invited Roland and I back to the tour bus and hung out with us the whole afternoon, showed us videos they were doing. It started my love of Slipknot, and Slipknot now has evolved into this band that plays stadiums and has the Knotfest and is one of the most successful metal bands in the world. So it was wonderful to watch from the earliest stages of their evolution to what they have blossomed into one of the most important bands of that whole era. And related to that, was when I came to Los Angeles in the 2000, I started working for this big merch company called Bravado, one of the big merch companies in the world at the time. And one day my boss came in and dropped a file on my desk and said, "There's this new band. We just signed them to merchandise. I'm assigning it to you." And it was this new band called the Murder Dolls. And as I looked into it, it was a band that Joey Jordison, the drummer from Slipknot, had formed as a side project. And he was playing guitar in it, which was unusual to begin with because he was such an amazing drummer who knew that he could play guitar. But he had teamed up with this fellow Wednesday 13, who I had heard of remotely because I'm a big Misfits fan, as I know Sean is, and so you kind of hear about these kind of horror punk bands that come out here and there. They're never really successful, but there was this fellow who had hit my radar a couple of times called Wednesday 13, who had been doing some stuff, and apparently him and Joey had got together and had formed this band together. And I remember seeing the first designs that were coming out for their merchandise, and I went, "Oh, this could be cool." And I remember going to see their very first shows here in California when they first joined, and just I saw them at the Whiskey one night. I was standing towards the back of the crowd because there wasn't an awful lot of people there. Not many people had heard about it. Only the Slipknot fans who knew that Joey was there were going to the show tonight. And I was at the back of the Whiskey where I was selling their T-shirts. And Kerry King came in from Slayer, and he just stood with me, and he stood like a statue with his arms crossed, staring at the stage as they played. And he didn't move for about 6 songs into this set. And then finally he turned to me and goes, "Pretty good." And he walked out.
Sounds like him.
As a PS to this story, it's now 2022, and I manage the Murder Dolls, so which is kind of cool. So, you got another one to talk about?
Well, it's funny you talk about Slipknot. Like, honestly, Slipknot made me give up drumming. Because back when I was getting into, I was in shape, younger, and I was playing a lot of speed metal, thrash metal, whatever you want to call it. And it was really challenging, like when Slayer started coming out with their peak albums, and then this new metal was coming out. The only true bands that were keeping true to the roots were like Slayer, Anthrax. They were keeping their roots the same, and Pantera. They were like, that was the new metal, band for me at that time, and I try to get into bands that kind of had that feel and sound like Pantera and stuff like that, and it's challenging, and then when a band like Slipknot comes out, you just go, "What the fuck is this, dude?" You're just like, I can't, there's no way I could keep up with that, and I want to start learning how to play all these new techniques on drums. I'm like, so literally I just kind of like, it turned me off to that kind of music. So I actually was jealous of Slipknot for quite some time, and I just refused to listen or watch them.
And this is also a band, of course, that had 3 percussionists.
Yeah, right? No, they're great, though. But, it was just what I went through. But, yeah, getting to see the transformation is pretty cool.
Maybe one of the earliest ones that I ever experienced, early in my musical evolution, was early in the 80s. I was a young fellow living in a little nowhere town in British Columbia, or in Alberta, called Medicine Hat. And we had heard rumblings through the Canadian music network of this band that was coming out of British Columbia that was starting to make some waves. And they were called Loverboy, which of course everybody knows Loverboy now. But when they first came out, they were unknown. And I remember seeing them first open for, who was it? I can't remember who. It was some other...
Was it Journey or Cheap Trick or something?
Nobody as big as that. It was somebody like Prism or Klaatu or one of those bands that was kind of big at that time. And I remember hearing them and thinking enough of them that I went and bought their record. And this is before I really, I didn't have a lot of money back then, so buying a record was a big investment. But I was impressed, and I hadn't seen many concerts at that point, so there was also that loyalty of, ooh, I saw them live. But really fell in love with that first record, especially that first record. To this day, I still know that first record from beginning to end, every word of every song and every note. And of course, they went on to be one of the biggest bands of the late 80s and had so many massive hits. And Sean and I have actually had the opportunity now to get to know the guys in Loverboy in a more recent time. We've seen them many times live over the last several years and gotten to know them, and really awesome guys and just really wonderful work ethic and a great environment to be around, and they still put on a hell of a show. I mean, when you go see Loverboy live, you don't really remember how many big hits these guys had. And you sit there and you sit down for the concert and they start playing, and every song you're kind of going, I know this one, I know this one, I know this one.
Right.
So, yeah, Loverboy, great one.
Yeah, good band, man. Where did we meet those guys? Was it Las Vegas at the Blue Oyster Cult show, or not, April Wine?
No, actually, what happened was, well, I met them originally because Adam and I were in Nottingham, England for, we were over there for some other reason, but there was a 3-day classic rock festival happening in Nottingham, and one of our best friends over there was the guy who was kind of in charge, so he hooked us up with passes and for the whole thing, and I was excited because I got to see Loverboy. And now at this stage in my career, I have met most of my musical heroes. David Gilmour, I'm looking at you. But most of my musical heroes I've met, but Loverboy I hadn't really met at that point. And so after their show was over, I got the guts to walk down to their dressing room and gently rap on the door, and Mike Reno answered the door, the singer. And he was like, what can I do for you? He was super friendly. I said, well, listen, you don't know me. My name's Ace. I manage this band, but I grew up in Canada. I'm a big fan of yours, and I just wanted to say hi and thank you for all the pleasure your music's given me over the years. And he was like, come on in, sat me down, handed me a beer, and, started hanging out with him and Paul Dean and all the other guys in the band. They were just so friendly and so nice. Mm-hmm. And so it was a few months later, I was back in the States, and we had gone to, that was it. There is a sport that's very popular in Canada called curling, and if any of you don't know what it is, they basically have these long rectangular ice rinks where they chuck these really heavy stones down, trying to make them stop on a target on each end. And it was a game that I played when I lived in Canada quite often. And every year the national championships take place in Las Vegas. I don't know why, that's just the way it is. And it's at one of the big hotels there. And during that week of the competition, the hotel brings in Canadian bands to play at their thing. We saw a number of them there. We saw April Wine perform that time. We were going to see Burton Cummings, but he got really sick and ended up canceling. But my good friend Brent Fitz, who plays in Slash's band, he also is in a really great Canadian cover band called Took. You should check him out if you haven't. We ran into him outside of the venue, and we were like, oh, what are you doing here? He says, oh, yeah, he's a fellow Canadian. He's a big Loverboy fan. He said, I got to come here and see Loverboy. And he looked at us and he said, do you guys have passes to get back afterwards and stuff? And we went, no. And he goes, I'll hook you up. And so he took us backstage afterwards, and again, we hung out with the guys. And I remember Mike Reno coming up to me going, don't I know you from somewhere? And I said, yeah, well, we met in Nottingham a couple months ago. He said, that's right, you're the Canadian manager guy, right? And, they were just so cool to us, and we hung out with them, and it was all great. And we've now seen them subsequent times. They're quite popular in California, so they come through here about once or twice a year, depending on the market and that sort of thing. So we've got to hang out with them a number of times, and they were always really, really cool, and they put on a great show. Really great show.
That was the Vegas show, right?
That was in Vegas. Yeah.
That's I met Vinnie Paul that night.
That was about 3 weeks before he passed away.
Yeah, it was strange. I actually went and I asked him if I could buy him a drink. He said he was okay. He was taken care of. But he passed away 3 weeks after that. It was just weird.
And he was there to see Loverboy too. So.
That and April Wine.
April Wine as well. I mean,
or April Wine. I think he was there for.
April Wine. I mean, this is kind of off topic, but I mean Sean and I experienced April Wine for the first time on one of the Rock Legends cruises. And this was a band that I grew up with in Canada and absolutely adored, but had never seen live and didn't really have much expectations. I mean, let's be honest, usually when you see your favorite band from the 70s perform now. There's hardly any original members or whatever. You're not really going to get something that's going to reignite your passion from those days. But I remember Sean and I witnessing their first show and just literally our jaws hanging open going, oh my God, this is an amazing band.
Yeah, they sounded good.
And we saw them twice more on that cruise. Each show was just amazing, and we've seen them many times since then.
We saw them in Canada, remember?
Yeah, we saw them in Canada once, and we saw them in Vegas, and we've seen them in a lot of places. So
yeah.
Another one that I'll mention here, it's just because they're one of my favorite groups, and I don't think they get the recognition that they deserve, is there's a little Australian band called the Hoodoo Gurus. And I got turned on to these guys back in the early 80s by a friend of mine who worked in a record store. And he would bring me these compilation tapes of new music that he had encountered as it came through the store. And on one of those tapes was a song from this band, the Hoodoo Gurus. And I thought it was amazing. And I ended up buying their whole back catalog that was available at the time and fell in love with the band. And then I read that they were going to be playing in Calgary at a university on their Blow Your Cool tour, which was an album I was running through my CD, or not even CD player at that time, a cassette player, over and over at the time. And I went and saw them play at this university. I got one of the last tickets in the house, and the show was just so awesome. And I love that band, and They really blossomed after that. They had a couple of major hits after that, and their videos were always well received. And Hoodoo Gurus. Before I go to my last one, do you have any other ones that you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about something. You ever come across a band that you saw that was famous, but you didn't realize that it was like an opening act, or you saw them before until someone brings it to your attention? Well, Nirvana was one for me.
Oh, really?
I went to see a band called Citizen Fish, I believe, at Long Beach University, and Nirvana opened up for them, and I had no clue who they were, so we were in the parking lot drinking beers, and I think it was before their Bleach album, or the Bleach album, they were actually...
It's funny you mentioned Nirvana, because I also saw Nirvana when they were in their early days, but not under any other pretense other than there was a period in the 90s when I had a group of friends who lived in Seattle, and I would go quite often to Seattle and hang out with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all big into motorcycles and things like that, so they had their various bars and clubs. And one time I was there visiting, they said, "Oh, you got to come with us tonight. We're going to go see this band that everybody's talking about. They're called Nirvana." And I went, "Okay." So we went, and I mean, the energy of that band was intense. I mean, they were just crazy on stage, and I remember standing there just going, "This is either going to be huge or it's going to fizzle out next week."
Right.
And, well, kind of did both at the end of the day. So, but
another band I want to mention before we wrap it up here is I stumbled across was Marilyn Manson.
Marilyn Manson.
When I first saw him, it was before he was actually doing like a music set. It was kind of strange. He would.
When it was the Spooky Kids?
I think in Spooky Kids he was mainly in the Florida area, and then I think he did a couple gigs out here. But he didn't really do any clubs out here, but he was opening up. I think I saw him with Danzig again at the Gibson Amphitheater, but it was before American Portrait album, or that album was just getting ready to come out. But a lot of just sound effects and a lot of creepy stuff going on, and it wasn't really tied in with like the music he was going to, that he made, after that. But it was... It was very strange, and I just like, wow, I wonder what they're going to be like in their next album, and look what happened to them. They blew up.
Yeah, I also encountered Manson relatively early. There had been a one-page article in Spin magazine or something showing him in all of his. This was about the time. It was a little bit later than you, because it was Portrait of an American Family would just come out or was about to come out.
Yeah, that's when they started touring a lot.
Yeah.
The album.
And I don't remember who they were opening for, whether it was Rob Zombie or White Zombie or Filter or somebody like that. I don't remember.
I want to say, I was going to actually bring that up too. I think it was a White Zombie tour.
Okay.
Or it might even have been Nine Inch Nails.
No, because the only time I've seen Nine Inch Nails was at the Gibson Amphitheater when they did those 3 nights there.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, I mean, I remember seeing that show and thinking it was pretty intensely cool, and I was a big Manson fan. I still am. I think he's a great. I can't agree with the kind of stuff that he's being accused of right now, but try to separate person from performer. But the last one was a band that is kind of. Well, they still do all right, but at the time they were nobody. But this is in the early 2000s. I had done some work for the band Nickelback when they were just starting off in Canada. I did their first website for them and that sort of stuff. They were part of a little label up there in Canada on their very first record, and they were starting to make some inroads. This was before the Silver Side Up album came out that was so big that just exploded them into the stratosphere. But it wasn't long before that, and they were playing at a venue in LA here called the Palace. And because I did their website and stuff, I was invited to go down to the show, and my friend Paul and I went. And there was this band opening for them that I hadn't heard of called 3 Doors Down. Mm-hmm. And this was when this band had just released their big debut album. And at the time, it hadn't really had a chance to blossom yet. This was, I think the first single had just come out, the Superman song that they did. And I remember seeing them play live and just thinking they were really good. Thinking, I should give this band a little more attention, which is something I did. That first album of theirs is still one that I rotate through on a regular basis. There's about 5 or 6 tracks on that record that I think are just crazy good. So anyway, so we'd love to hear from all of you about some of the bands that you saw before they made it big and hear your stories. Feel free to leave them as a comment in whatever avenue you're watching or listening to this podcast. And in the meantime, I want to thank all of you for your continued support. We're always looking for feedback. You can email us at acetalksmusic@gmail.com. We also have this really cool thing called the After Hours Show, which is on the Patreon platform. You'll see the link at the end of this video. And come check it out, and we'd love to see you over there as well. We tell road stories over there about the crazy encounters we've had on the road. And in the meantime, everybody try and stay safe. Shows are starting to happen again, so just remember, this pandemic isn't over. Protect yourself and take care of yourself. Yes. So until next time.